This day in sports history. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. I'm a big fan of shave soap. I've been using different brands for years, and I recently gave Sterling's shave soaps a try, and I've been very happy with the results. Sterling's shave soaps give you a great lather and a frictionless feel that allows the razor to glide right over the skin for a super close shave. No skin irritation and a clean, refreshing feel with no soapy residue after. I can tell you without a doubt, it's simply the best shave I've ever had. And my wife has noticed too. And here's the thing. With the ability to purchase 1-ounce sample pucks, you can try out different scents to find the right one for you. Give Sterling Soap a try today. Visit sterlingsoap.com. That's STIRLING soap.com. It's This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. It's November 18th, and on this day in 1985, it was one of the most gruesome injuries ever seen on live television. This is one of those moments that if you watched it live, you probably remember where you were. I was watching this game live on this night back in '85. I saw the injury in real time and then in slow-mo, and I have not watched it since, not even to write this story. This was a Monday night showdown in the nation's capital between the hometown Redskins and division rival New York. Skins quarterback Joe Theismann was not having his best season. In fact, it was his worst. He'd thrown twice as many interceptions as touchdowns so far, and after winning a Super Bowl and league MVP back in '83, the 36-year-old Theismann knew his finest years were behind him, but thought he had a few more left in him. Heck, he just signed a new contract prior to the season. With the score tied at 7 at the start of the second quarter, Washington had the football just shy of midfield. On second down, it looked like a handoff to John Riggins, but Riggins pitched it back to Theismann for a possible flea flicker. However, the pocket collapsed quickly, and Giants linebacker Lawrence Taylor grabbed Theismann and turned him, and then fell on him with all his weight. Theismann said he heard what sounded like a pair of gunshots. LT said he knew right away. He'd heard the pops too, and he heard Joe screaming in pain and knew it was bad. Real bad. Taylor's reaction was immediate, waving to the Redskins bench to get the training staff out on the field quickly. Theismann suffered a comminuted compound fracture of the tibia and the fibula. I'm not going to define comminuted for you. It paints too vivid a picture, really, but you can look that up for yourself. The next morning, Taylor called Joe in the hospital, and when LT asked him how he was doing, Theismann said, "Not well. You broke both bones in my leg." LT responded, "Joe, you've got to understand something. I don't do things halfway." Despite the fact that he was going to be in a cast for a minimum of 3 months, Theismann said 4 days after the injury that he had every intention to come back for the '86 season. He'd broken his leg when he played in the CFL and figured, well, he can just do it again. 6 months after getting out of the cast, Theismann was about 15 minutes into a planned 60-minute workout. It was then that he realized his right leg had healed a few inches shorter than it previously was. He was hobbling around, and Redskin coaches and staff saw enough in that 15 minutes. Theismann was released shortly after the failed workout, and his career was over. But for all intents and purposes, his career ended on this night back in 1985. So before going into this next story, I do offer this warning. This story mentions self-harm and may not be appropriate for all listeners. On this day in 1982, South Korean boxer Duk Koo Kim died after being in a coma for 5 days. Back on the 13th, Kim had stepped into the ring as the #1 challenger to the WBA lightweight title held by Ray Boom Boom Mancini, even though he was the top challenger with a record of 17-1-1 that included 8 victories by knockout. He was lightly regarded. He had never fought in the U.S., and he had never been involved in a 15-round fight. The longest he'd gone was 12, and that was just once. Mancini was not taking him lightly, though. He felt like this fight was going to be a tough one. The fight was held at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas and broadcast live on CBS. The fight was pretty square throughout the first 10 rounds, with both boxers delivering solid blows. By the time the 13th round rolled around, though, it was obvious to those watching ringside that Kim was struggling. Mancini reeled off a series of 44 straight punches. Kim didn't or could not counter, and only was able to slow the barrage with a few clinches. In the 14th round, Mancini landed a sharp left hook, missed on a couple, and then delivered the knockout blow to Kim's face. He fell back and slid under the rope. He was able to get to a knee, and he tried to stand, but he wobbled backward, and at that point, referee Richard Green called the fight. Kim was in trouble, though. While Mancini celebrated his win and retention of his title, Kim lost consciousness and slipped into a coma. He had to be carried out of the arena on a stretcher. When he arrived at the hospital, doctors found a subdural hematoma and performed emergency brain surgery. He never regained consciousness, and he died on this day in '82. Now, that in itself would have been tragic enough, but that unfortunately was just the beginning. Mancini blamed himself for Kim's death, and he fell into a deep depression. Promoter Bob Arum said Mancini was never the same after this fight. He lost his title 2 years later. Kim's mother flew in from South Korea to spend their final hours together, and she committed suicide 3 months later. The referee in the fight, Richard Green, also took the death of Kim incredibly hard. He committed suicide in July 1983. There were some rule changes that came out afterwards. The Nevada State Athletic Commission imposed a standing 8 count. That would allow a referee to call a knockdown even if the boxer was not down. If a boxer suffered a knockout loss, well, the boxer's license was suspended for a minimum of 45 days. This fight had been sanctioned by the WBA, but the WBC announced that title fights would be reduced from 15 to 12 rounds. The WBA and the IBF followed in 1987, and the WBO used 12 rounds when it formed in 1988. Kim's death also caused a change to pre-fight checkups. Before this fight, it was simply a blood pressure check and put a stethoscope on the chest. Afterwards, doctors implemented electrocardiograms, cognitive tests, and lung tests. All right, here's a boxing story that does not have a tragic end, simply a quick one. In 2017, South Africa's Zolani Tete won his WBO bantamweight title fight over Siboniso Gonya. It took Tete all of 11 seconds. The fight was in Ireland, and you gotta hope that the undercard fights to this one were longer and more interesting. It only took one punch in this one. 6 seconds into the fight, Tete caught Gonya with a right hook. Gonya was out cold. The referee ended the fight without even finishing the count. It is the fastest knockout in a title fight in any weight division. Are you a hockey fan? Then you'll love Eric Zweig's new book, Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2. It's a treasure trove of untold tales, bizarre incidents, and captivating trivia that will leave even the most devoted puckhead astounded. The intense rivalries, epic showdowns, and historic clashes that shaped the NHL's early years, it's all in there. Zweig uncovers the true stories that helped shape the sport, ensuring that you will never look at hockey the same way again. Check out Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2 on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. On this day in 1966, Los Angeles Dodger pitcher Sandy Koufax shocked the baseball world when he announced his retirement. It was a surprise for several reasons. 1, he was only 30 years old. 2, he'd had another great season. In '66, he'd led the league with 27 wins, a 1.73 ERA, and 317 strikeouts, the Triple Crown for pitchers. And he'd won his 3rd Cy Young Award. And 3rd, the Dodgers had just won the World Series in a 4-game sweep of the Baltimore Orioles. He was the best pitcher in the league on the best team in the major leagues, and he was set to make $125,000 in 1967. So what was up? Well, he had an arthritic left elbow, and he feared that continuing to pitch would lead to permanent damage and loss of use in his left hand. This was before the era of arthroscopic surgery that would not be available until the late 70s into the early 80s. If he came around, say, 15 years later, he probably would have been able to extend his career another decade. Time now for today's non-sports Did You Know? Snow globes. They're kind of popular this time of year, right? Well, they were invented by mistake. Initially, Irwin Percy had been asked to improve lighting in surgical rooms. Light bulbs at that point in time did not produce very much light. Well, he tried infusing bulbs with water to magnify the light, and then he started adding flakes to enhance the magnification. Metal flakes sank, but when he tried semolina flakes, they floated, and they reminded him of snow. He then added a tiny little church to the globe, and voila, the first snow globe. That's all I've got for you today. I'll have more tomorrow on This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.